Hello and welcome to the Pink Pineapple Podcast, where we peel back femtech and take a bite out of more than just the juicy bits.
I'm Claudia, and I'm Emma's partner in Pineapple for this adventure.
And I'm Emma. Together, we're exploring women's health across the full timeline, from first periods to menopause and everything in between.
Each week, we'll dive into the stories, science, and software shaping the future of women's health, from hormones to hardware, fertility to femtech founders.
Think of us as your slightly nosy best friends who just happen to be doctors with a healthy curiosity for innovation.
We'll be chatting to clinicians, creators, and change makers, and yes, asking the questions you actually want answered.
So whether you're out for a walk, cooking dinner, or hiding from your to-do list, join us as we get curious, clinical, and occasionally controversial.
This is the Pink Pineapple Podcast,
where women's health meets what's next. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pink Pineapple Podcast. It's January. It is the month where everyone is promising that they're going to become a better version of themselves overnight. And we know that women especially get hit with these kind of unrealistic expectations with regards to diet and routines and just life in general. So today we thought we would invite someone on who actually really understands behaviour change. So we are joined by Dr Rosie Webster. She is a behavioural scientist, former Babylon and Zava leader and Zinc advisor, and now she is helping companies make a lot more impact through their digital products. And she also works as a health coach and creating habits that actually stick with women. Hello, Rosie.
Hi, nice to see you both. Really great to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And Claudia, who have you got with you today?
Emma, you sound so despondent when you said that. Claudia, who have you got? I did my best. I think she looks quite cool today, but here she is. She is absolutely wrapped and surrounded in a tape measure, because I do think a lot of today's focus will be around weight loss, expectations around that. We're going to be touching on GLP-1s as well. So I felt that this was a suitable look for her today.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think you've done well there, Claudia. Well done.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry I sounded so despondent.
Never mind.
Okie dokie. So Rosie, let's kick off with New Year's resolutions. And what is the best New Year's resolution that you've ever happily broken?
Yeah, good question. I probably, similarly to most people in the world, it's probably all of them. I think I've probably broken every New Year's resolution that I've ever made, and I think that people break, if not all of them, then most of them. But ultimately, I used to start every year with some kind of like health kit. So I never called it a diet, but that's ultimately what it was, right? I was bouncing back from Christmas, trying to lose weight, feeling guilty about everything that I'd eaten. So the New Year's resolution that I've ever happily broken is in 2018. I quit that. So I quit dieting and haven't dieted since. Essentially, I was on like a winter sun holiday in January, which was lovely, which is where I wish I was now, in the sunshine. And I read a book. It was Body Positive Power by Megan Jane Crabb, that introduced me to this concept of like body acceptance and thinking about health at every size and all of this. And I was like, oh, it was like a revelation to me. And on that holiday, I decided, okay, I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to start kind of eating what I want, listening to my body. And I've never looked back. Oh my God, I'm so much happier now as a result.
Sounds good. That sounds like a great resolution to very happily break. And I think if we haven't already joined you, myself and Emma will probably join you on that, to be honest. I was going to ask you, so what actually happens psychologically in January that makes so many women set huge goals that almost nobody keeps?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because there's a lot of evidence as to why that first part of why people actually set goals. So there's something called the fresh start effect. And it was coined by a behavioural scientist called Katie Monkman, who's got a brilliant book called How to Change. I'd highly recommend. And essentially, when we have these like moments in time that feel like a new beginning, so January tends to be the biggest one, but even things like birthdays or the start of spring or the start of a new term, so in September, or even just a Monday, they tend to be a time when we have a little spike in motivation to make changes. And that happens because it feels like temporally, so time-wise, like a fresh start. we're distanced from our like past self. So everything that happened previously, or any mistakes that we've made, any ways that we felt like we might have failed in the past, we feel distant from that, and we have this renewed confidence of like, oh, it is now this fresh start. Things are going to be different. So we feel more motivated. We feel much more confident in our ability to make change. And there's lots of evidence that that's a time when people do make lots of changes. Also, there's some evidence to show that people might be more successful if they start to make changes at that time. But the problem is that spike in motivation that we get is just that. It's just a spike. So it goes up and then it drops down again, like almost as quickly, essentially. And the problem is, what we actually tend to do in that spike of motivation is we almost get really overconfident and we decide we're going to overhaul our lives. We're going to make these huge changes. I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week, or I'm going to completely cut out sugar or carbs or whatever it is. And ultimately, those huge changes aren't really sustainable. They're not really sustainable because we don't enjoy them, but also our body also might not really like those kind of sudden, really extreme changes. But in January, particularly, it tends to happen as a bit of a rebound from that overindulgence that we have over Christmas. And particularly if people have normally the rest of the year been on a pattern of like restricting their eating in some way, even if that's just trying to be good. When Christmas hits, they will tend to be like, oh my God, Christmas is here. That's my excuse to eat the world. And that's what they do. And then as a result, then the pendulum swings the other way in January. But with these really extreme changes that then are really difficult to stick to, essentially. So it is like a bit of a moment that can be really helpful, but we often tend to do it in the wrong way and through no fault of our own. We do it that way because that's what we're told to do. In January, we're being pushed everything diets, everything gym, all of those types of things.
So interesting. There are so many things you've just said there, Rosie, that I can definitely relate to. I think as well, when you're talking about the starting, for example, even on a Monday. And I think that some people get into this headspace, don't they, where kind of Wednesday, Thursday, I've kind of fallen off the wagon. Okay, we'll start again on Monday. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, and then it's like, oh, we've kind of given ourselves this kind of pass to continue to treat, until the next week. And I think that is something that I think a lot of people kind of fall into that mentality. And the other thing that you mentioned, that all or nothing approach, it goes from nothing to 100 miles an hour. It goes from complete diet overhaul, gym 5 times a week, drinking this amount of water, taking these vitamins, and it's overwhelming, isn't it? So other
Mm-hmm.
than the kind of all or nothing approach, what are the other reasons why people tend to fail at these resolutions? I mean, I think fail is probably not the right word to use, is it? But maybe, why do people, why they're unable to
Struggle to
see
stick
some
to
of these
them.
intentions through to the end?
Yes, yeah, that's good. And I agree with you because I think fail implies that it's like our failure when it isn't, right? I think that we are set up to fail. Yeah, I think, yes, the all or nothing thing is definitely probably the biggest reason. And I think related to that, it's that we often tend to view it as like changing our life rather than thinking about the reality of what our life actually is and looks like. Because all of our lives are really busy, we've got lots of things going on, we've got tons of priorities. Any changes that we make need to either fit around that or support those things that already exist, when actually the changes that we make tend to end up being in battle with them. And whenever that's the case, at some point eventually some of those other things that are pulling you in other directions, they're just going to win, essentially. So it's really not thinking about how things integrate into your life. And also I think often it's these changes aren't grounded in something that's really fundamentally important to us, or something that feels really like a positive change. So they're normally really focused on, oh God, I need to lose weight, or I feel really guilty, or like I feel, whether that's I feel unattractive, or like I really don't like how I look and things like that. And actually coming to that place of negativity is not particularly helpful if we're thinking about caring for our body and making kind of positive change. It ends up being punishing, which doesn't feel good. And things that don't feel good, we're not going to stick to them. And lastly, I think that we often tend to approach change like it's going to be easy, or at least like it's going to be different this time. Right. So if we've been on these all or nothing cycles of making changes and then like falling off that wagon, we think like, oh, this time it will be different. I'll do it a different way, or I feel more motivated this time, or like, just expecting like this time will be different, and realistically most of the time it is not, unfortunately. And again, that's not because of like you as an individual, it's just because that approach is just set up to fail. So the traditional ways that we approach behavior change are set up to fail because of that like all or nothing because of that very like rigorous, like active regulation of your behavior, which is hard to maintain. Like actively thinking about how we're behaving all of the time is really effortful, and your brain doesn't want to do it.
And are there differences you see in the way women approach habits or change compared to men?
Yes, I do. I do think so. I think we're all part of the same difficult world with all of different messages about how we should look and what we should eat and what we should be doing, like all being bombarded with. However, I do think that it tends to be a little bit more extreme for women. I think particularly those pressures around what we should look like, how our bodies should be, what size our bodies should be, even aging and stuff like that. I think the pressure is heightened in terms of like women having judgment around their appearance a little bit more. So all of that like diet culture and those expectations tend to make things a little bit more difficult. As a result, as women, we have more difficult relationships with our bodies. We might probably also have more difficult relationships with food as a result, because over time we might have dieted and things like that. And it's an unfortunate fact, and it is changing gradually, but I would say for the majority of women, at least the women that I work with, it still tends to be the women, particularly in straight relationships, who are picking up more of the household management, more of the childcare, some of those types of things. And as a result, it just tends to be much more difficult for them to prioritize themselves, essentially. So while men do also struggle with this, they do have some of the same pressures. Some of them might also be on those same cycles of like all or nothing changes. Um, and there's definitely additional pressures for women that make it harder, I think.
I was going to ask as well, Rosie.
Hmm.
I mean, you've kind of touched on some of it actually, kind of that. I suppose that kind of social media environment, the images that women are bombarded with regularly. I was going to touch on as well, just kind of the environment in general that's around us. So, for example, if you are someone that is super busy, you need to go and grab lunch. You're stepping into shop just to pick something up, the product placement, what is in front of you, adverts on TV, billboards you might see. How does that kind of impact on behavior change as well?
Massively. So I would say actually our environment's probably the biggest influence on what it is that we're doing. And it can feel like a nightmare because ultimately we've got all these companies spending huge amounts of money on simultaneously selling us like lots of delicious foods and trying to get us to eat more and more of them. And also like whether it's like devices or TV subscriptions or whatever it is to kind of keep us sitting down rather than moving. And then we're also simultaneously getting all of these messages of like, you should lose weight, you should look younger, you should look thinner. And it's really overwhelming. And I think that's one of the reasons why we ended up in these all or nothing cycles, because we're constantly fighting against it. So it's another one of the reasons why it really isn't anyone's like fault when they struggle to stick to things, because you are kind of fighting against this system and this environment. So it is really it is hard. But I think the more aware you are of some of those things, I think the easier it gets to try and like tackle them a little bit. And one of the things that I advocate for is really focusing on listening to your body. So working on what we call interoception and listening to things like how hungry you are, when you need to eat, what is it that your body's craving, and things like that. And so listening to those signals rather than the external signals. And those external signals might be what's available in the shop that you've just walked into, or it might be someone telling you you need to eat only X amount of calories a day, or whatever it is, or you should not be snacking, or these types of things. Instead, looking internally. And I like to think that helps a little bit with some of this environmental stuff. It doesn't stop the noise, it's still all going to be there. But if you're more confident in knowing what your body wants, then it gets just a little bit easier.
This brings us on really nicely, actually, onto GLP-1s, because you mentioned this noise, and I hear a lot the term that
Mm.
GLP-1s work by removing food noise. So this year, GLP-1s seem to be absolutely everywhere, especially in women's health conversations. How do you think GLP-1s are changing the landscape of weight and health behavior in women?
Oh, it's a big question. I definitely have a lot of opinions on this. I think, firstly, I guess thinking about what we were just talking about the environment stuff and the messaging stuff, I think that it's changing the environment in a really negative way to ultimately make us all feel even worse about ourselves. So it feels like we've gone from the era of body positivity being a bit more in fashion back to more like skinny chic, and like lots of pressure. Previously, we've seen lots of people who were kind of plus size fashion or fat positive like influencers who are now taking GLP-1s. Obviously that is entirely their choice. They do it for their any reason, their own reasons, but it does make it hard. And I think that it exacerbates like all of this, and all of the rhetoric around it exacerbates what we call the weight stigma. So the judgment that people feel, whether it's perceived judgment or people actually making comments about people's bodies and about their size. And what we know is that weight stigma is really, really harmful to health. So it actually has really negative health impacts. And we also know that it is much more, people who are experiencing weight stigma are much less likely to engage in behaviours that are good for their health, which explains why it ends up having all of these negative health impacts. And I think that this GLP-1s debate at the moment, them being so popular, I do think that it is exacerbating some of that weight stigma, which is actually going to be negative for health. In terms of that question around the food noise that you mentioned, Claudia, I think it's an interesting one. And I know that food noise is something that people really, really struggle with, find really, really hard. It's something specifically that I work on with clients in my coaching. Yes, GLP-1s will reduce your food noise, and they do that by reducing the amount that you feel hungry. The challenge is that as soon as the GLP-1 goes away, that food noise will be straight back again, because you haven't really dealt with the causes of that food noise. Basically, you've just squashed the symptom ultimately. So yeah, in my opinion, like GLP-1s, if people want to take them, as entirely up to you, and if that feels like something that's going to be helpful for them, like great. But ultimately, to me, it kind of feels like it's just the latest diet. Essentially, it's a thing that works in the short term. It has a lot of side effects, and ultimately, once it goes away, once you stop taking it in the same way as once you stop kind of being on a diet, you'll likely then regain the weight essentially, and we'll have all of that food noise back again. And my worry is that people aren't really being supported to make those changes, to deal with their relationship with food, and to change their behaviours and habits in a way that can sustain them beyond the end of when they stop taking it.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. What does responsible, sustainable GLP-1 use look like from your perspective?
I mean, it's a difficult one. I think, I mean, the ideal, and I know that this is very idealistic, would be if people have already done the work on improving their relationship with food, got into a really, really good place with habits, but they're still in a larger body and they have some urgent need to be smaller. So I don't believe that if someone is, like has great behavior in terms of like eating and exercise, if they're in a larger body, like in my opinion, that's fine. They're doing a lot of things, and those behaviors will help to keep them healthy. But if they do have a need, then that they want to be smaller, and they already feel in a good place with all of that stuff, then yes, GLP-1s will help them. I know that that is very idealistic. I know very few people have the support that they need to ever get to that place. So I think if people are going to embark on it, I think it's making sure that you are ideally working with someone who is going to support you in making some of those changes, because it is going to be difficult. Yes, the GLP-1 will make you lose weight, but it's not going to automatically change a lot of your behavior. So can you kind of get some support in order to be able to make some of those changes alongside, and particularly doing things like keeping up with exercise and strength training and things like that, because there's a risk of loss of muscle mass, and because of the amount of weight that you're losing, and stuff like that. So I think making sure that, at the very least, making sure that you're doing those things alongside.
Yeah, I mean, it might be the algorithm that I've fallen into on Instagram, but I've fallen into this really crazy space where I've got the whole skinny talk debate going on
Yeah.
one side, and then I've got all these people doing some serious weightlifting, and I've kind of got like this, so I've got this jumble going on at the moment. And I've noticed even in my own friendship group that you're either on Ozempic or you are lifting weights. There seems to be
Yeah.
you're in one or you're in the other, rather than
Yeah.
actually just combining, if possible, the two, because that sounds like it would be helpful too. So it's going to be so interesting to see what happens in this next year. Emma and I were doing some predictions for the year ahead when it comes to health and women's health and health tech. And GLP-1s is one of our big ones. We're really interested to see what happens this year or two coming up, because we think there are going to be a lot of changes and a lot of advancements, but also a lot of challenges that come with it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is an interesting one, and I agree with you that I think that they're the two trends at the moment. It's really interesting to see them happen, and like how they're kind of a bit of a parallel. It's like the lifting and the strength thing is almost like a bit of a rebellion against the skinny talk
Yes.
thing, in a way that I quite like to see.
Yes, I see it like that too. And I was talking to some friends about whether GLP-1s where they're not used for health benefit, but more for an aesthetic purpose, so to be slimmer, but with no health reasons that are obvious anyway, at that point in time when someone decides to go on it. Is it even a form of eating disorder if you are doing that? Is it like going back to the days when people would take laxatives, for example? So yeah, we were doing a little bit of thinking around that.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I'm not an expert like in the eating disorder space, but it is very adjacent to the kind of work that I do. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that it can be, and I think that anything that kind of feels that you're reliant on or problematic, or the reasons that you're doing it for, like, can be disordered, and not even necessarily just in people who are doing it who are in smaller bodies. We also know that people in bigger bodies are highly at risk of eating disorders, and very at risk of it not being recognized because they're in bigger bodies. People don't think that they can necessarily have an eating disorder. So that's one to watch out for as well, and the problematic of like how they're using them and how long they're using them and how people are accessing them as well. Because obviously, while if people are accessing it through the NHS, then that will be relatively controlled. But I also know that people are a lot of the time these days actually accessing it privately. So we probably have a bit less visibility over how people are using them, and it is a risk.
So I was going to ask Rosie, actually, you kind of touched on it a little bit about stigma surrounding weight.
Mm.
And this is something that we know that people who struggle with their weight, they feel that they experience stigma, not only from kind of, people who aren't health professionals, but also health professionals as well. And I wanted just to ask a little bit more about the impacts that that has on people and their behaviours, that stigma, and kind of the risks that that has on their long-term health.
Yeah, massively. It's a huge problem. And I think the biggest way that it's a problem is that people then avoid healthcare. So I've done research before in the past talking to people about their experiences, and they've had, say diabetics, for example. There are various complications that people might have that when there are early symptoms of those, they need to seek healthcare because it needs to be addressed quickly. I've had people in interviews talking about worrying symptoms that they are having that they haven't been to the GP for, because they just say, oh, well, if I go to the doctor, I just know that they're going to tell me just to lose weight. So I'm going to wait until I've lost weight and then I'm going to go. And obviously, in that time, you don't know how much worse things are going to get in the meantime. And it's a real problem, people delaying seeking care. We also see that actually doctors behave differently with patients with bigger bodies. There's evidence to show they're likely to do kind of less tests and things like that, which is a real risk. So that, they're delaying going, and then when they go, there's a risk that they're not getting the same level of care. And I mean, it's really difficult. It's a really hard space. Obviously, my heart is completely with the people who are in bigger bodies who are experiencing these awful things. Healthcare wise, like the actual clinicians delivering the care, like I also want them to know that, like, yes, it's something that they should address and look at, but also I don't want them to feel like, oh, well, she's just saying like we're doing all of these things wrong, because actually the problem is the society and the culture that we're living that's so focused on weight. It is fat phobic, essentially, is how I would describe it. And that is ultimately the reason why they are behaving in some of these ways. So it's like a cultural structural problem that is then magnified in this healthcare setting. And yeah, it's a huge problem.
How, Rosie, do you think we're able to encourage people to separate long-term health goals from, I suppose, weight goals or body goals? How do you think we can kind of separate
Yeah.
the two?
Yeah, so it's a tough one, because I think often when I talk about this kind of stuff and say, well, let's maybe move away from weight loss, people say, but then what's going to motivate people? And I think that's because people are so used to being like, oh, we do this to lose weight. But there are lots of other reasons to do things. And yes, overall health goals are like one thing to look at, but I actually think it's about taking it much more immediate. The closer we can bring motivators to the thing that we're doing right now, the much more likely it is to sustain behavior. So there's evidence to show even health goals aren't particularly good at motivating people in the very long term. However, if instead we can really focus on um, changes in how people feel in themselves, or a lot of the work that I do in my coaching is like finding things that are really important to people in their lives and helping to find behaviors that really enhance them. So for example, like if they really are keen for like more social contact, then getting them to be exercising or like doing like a supper club, like healthy supper club or whatever with friends, or if they really value learning, maybe they go on like a cookery course, or maybe they learn, a new style of dance or whatever it is. So finding things that are really, really supportive of like the things that they are doing right now. And they might all still be in service of a longer term health goal, but it's important to find something that's a little bit closer to home that's really, really going to keep people moving. Um, Ultimately, and I think this is also a message to the like clinicians that we were just talking about now, like focus on behaviors rather than weight. So think about where you're at right now, how you're feeling, where it is that you want to feel, what are the things that are important to you in life, and then think about, okay, of all of the things that I'm doing with my behavior, which ones are really supporting that and I need to be doing more of, and which ones are actually detracting from that and making me feel worse, or like actually aren't really supportive of how I want to be or who I want to be, and then focus on those behaviors, because they're also something that we have more control over. I know it's not easy to change behavior, but weight loss is elusive, it's hard to achieve, and it's very, very hard to maintain. So we've got much less control over it, whereas our behaviors is something that we can look at and see every day. So I think it's bringing it back down to those more immediate motivators and really focusing in on those behaviors that support them.
So if you could give women one principle to rethink New Year's goals, would that be it? Would it be to focus on behaviors?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it. Like I think yes, focusing on behaviors is like the first step. But I actually would say that the second thing is to not underestimate the amount of work it takes to make some of those changes, and actually set some time aside. So when you've got that spike in January motivation, don't just use it to rush straight to the gym. Use it to really put some time into thinking about, okay, why do I want to change, and what do I want to change, and what is that going to look like, and spending a little bit of time on that. And if it's okay to make just a little plug, I've launched a January email series to help people with that. It's totally free. It's just 7 days of emails to get people to working through that process of thinking about, why do I want to change, what do I want to change, and how do I actually get there. Because I think it's very easy for me to say, just do this, but actually I think that that's quite a novel concept to people. I don't think people generally know where to start, so the idea is that it kind of supports them through that journey.
Sounds brilliant.
So, Rosie, you've worked for some huge health tech companies. Where are health tech companies going wrong when it comes to behavior change?
God, yeah, I could talk for a whole other hour on this, but I won't, don't worry. I think there's a few things. I think fundamentally, the way that they get it wrong is that they see things that other people are building, or they hear about things of behavioral science. They might read a book and think like, oh yes, that's the tool that I'm going to use. So I'm going to use habit formation, or I'm going to use gamification, or I'm going to use like risk assessments, things like that. When actually the way that we change behavior is by first really understanding that behavior. So really understanding our audience, really understanding why they are or aren't doing the behavior, like what's really going to drive it for them, and building something that is really specific and unique to that audience and to the challenges that they personally are facing. So like that is the ideal way to do it, and a lot of companies just don't do that. And like I understand why they're rushing to quickly get something to market and things like that. I think the way that that manifests is that a lot of products tend to look the same, or like some iteration of the same thing. So some iteration of goal setting, tracking, maybe some gamification features like leaderboards and badges and things like that. And also things like giving people risk information. So people think like, oh, well, if we give people information about their risk, even really, really personalized. So even if you kind of do all of the stuff around running lots of tests or whatever, giving them all of that information, there's evidence to show that even if that information is highly personalized, it's not actually enough to make people change. So you need to do that and then do loads of other things in order to actually get them there. But people think, oh well, if we just tell them that that this is something that they need to change, and that they're at risk of having a heart attack in 5 years or whatever, like even that surprisingly isn't really enough,
Yeah.
because change is hard and they need a lot of enablement to then get there.
Rosie, I've downloaded everything and I've deleted everything. I have worn every single wearable, everything. I have tracked every single potential possible human insight, and I got rid of absolutely everything. I think there's an element of fatigue in this space as well. I think, you know, there is an element of tech fatigue going on that I keep banging on about, and some people look at me like I'm mad when I say that, but I do think that there is. I mean, it is there any point in using these apps that are out there, all these various weight loss and weight tracking and activity tracking? Like, is there any point? Is there any merit?
Oh, I mean, it really depends on the person. So in my opinion, as a blanket population level behavior change intervention, I don't, the evidence is mixed, but in my opinion, I think for a lot of people, they don't work in the long term. But in terms of like as an individual, I think it really depends on what it is specifically that you are trying to solve for. So for example, if you are if you take like cycle tracking, so symptom tracking around your cycle, for example, if you are experiencing some problems and you're not really sure if that's normal and you want to kind of determine that, like, yes, that could be something that's really helpful to you. And you might do it for a certain period of time until you've solved that problem. And then that's fine, go off to something else. And I think I always think about this from like the product perspective of this thing of like, what actual problem or pain point are you solving? And I think actually it helps us to think about that as like users as well, right? If I start using this product, what am I using it for? Because otherwise, you're just like filling your time, you're filling your energy, your attention as well, right? We've got so many things like pulling our attention the whole time. But if that's pulling you because it's going to help you to solve something really specific, then like, great, do it. And then do it until that thing is solved and then move on and maybe think about something else. But if it's not really helping you to solve anything, maybe take a moment to reflect on like, how much is that just giving you noise rather than something useful?
And how, Rosie, do you think we can actually make changes or products that are going to have an impact?
Good question. So I think the fundamental answer to that is all about the process of how you build. So as I was saying earlier, taking the time to really deeply understand things, creating something that then feels uniquely designed for that specific audience and that specific problem, and then also evaluating it. So like testing it, putting it out there, is it working? If not, what's not working? How do we evolve it and things like that? And you can do that in a quick, lightweight way. So that's the kind of process answer. In terms of the more features answer, some of the stuff that I would love to see more of, I think firstly, like helping people to make really concrete plans. So many products have like goal setting of like, oh, how many times a day do you want to do this? And yes, we'll send you a reminder, etc., etc. That's not really how habits are formed. Habits are formed by embedding a behavior in response to a cue. There's something happens and then you do something off the back of it. And then you do that enough times and you no longer have to think about it anymore. So for example, when you go to the bathroom in the morning, you go to the loo and then you brush your teeth. You don't have to think and decide, okay, I'm going to brush my teeth now. It's just something that you automatically do. And I think that there is a lot of space for using the kind of plans, these kind of like linking a cue with a behavior in digital products. I know that it's not easy because everyone's life looks different. You've got to help them to like identify a cue and things like that. But I think that that's like a really simple feature that a lot of products could be adding. There's tons of products that I use that I'm like, oh, I wish they would just let me do this and I don't have to like create that for myself elsewhere. But I think, and going back to what Claudia was saying about the tech fatigue stuff, I also think that bringing the human element back into it, I think is something that like feels quite important. And it's one of the reasons why I've gone into coaching, because I've realized that actually for real change, most people don't need an app. They need somebody to talk through and think about their very specific situation. So that kind of like coaching style human support, I think is really important. Obviously, like I think humans do the best job of that, but we're also getting to a place where actually there's a chance that AI can do a pretty good job of that if people are open to that. Some people want the human connection, but for others, actually, like some kind of AI coach could be helpful. But that's because it is like unpicking those very specific blockers for that individual.
For every woman that is listening, what is your key take-home message for January? Have you got words of wisdom for starting 2026?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would like people to take away is like, stop looking outwards and listening outwards and start looking inwards. So your body is amazing. Like our bodies are absolutely incredible, and it will give you a lot of the messages that you need to look after it well. But when we are listening to a lot of those external messages, even the trackers and things like that, telling you you've not quite walked enough steps today, it makes it much harder to actually listen to your body and think about like, what do I need? When do I need rest? When do I feel like I need to move? Things like that. So I think ultimately, if you can like turn it inwards and really think about that interoception that I was saying about earlier, really listening to your body and what it is that you need. Some people find that quite scary because we're so used to living with external rules, but like, trust me, there is a process that you can go through to like feel like you can actually look inwards. And then that kind of helps us to avoid a lot of that external noise and like hopefully get to a place that feels healthier, but in a more peaceful way, rather than like constantly striving to meet a million things that we're told that we need to do.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Rosie, for joining us. It's the January reset that we definitely all needed. If people want to find you, work with you, read more from you, where should they go?
Yes, for sure. So my website is reframehealth.uk. So you can find on there lots of information about my coaching and things like that. Equally, if you're interested to kind of work with me more on the consulting side, you can drop me an email. I'm just rosie@reframehealth.uk. The January email series that I mentioned, that will be available throughout the whole of January. And yeah, in my Instagram, I'm again at reframehealth.uk. So reframehealth.uk, pretty much everywhere is how you kind of get hold of me. And yeah, I'm available for kind of consulting stuff as well as the coaching stuff. So if people want a bit of support in that new year time and quietening that noise, then yeah, I'm here to help.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It's been really interesting. And I think that a lot of people will be incorporating your advice in their January plans for sure.
Good. No, I'm really, really pleased. I know it's a hard time for a lot of people. So if I can help just a little bit, that's awesome.
Take care, and we'll be back with another podcast soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for being here. We love having you with us on this journey through women's health and innovation.
Follow us on Instagram at the Pink Pineapple Podcast for clips, conversations, and the latest in women's health and femtech.
We'll see you next week. Same pineapple, new topic. Everything we talk about on the Pink Pineapple Podcast is here to inform and inspire, but it's not a substitute for professional medical advice. If you're worried about your health, please reach out to your GP or healthcare provider.